Welcome today, Community Voices, Gamification and Gameful Learning in Schoology. You can take this conversation out of this area and into the Twitterverse using the hashtag SchoologyLeap. And if you check out that hashtag now, you will find I've also linked out to the handles of both of our panelists today as well. So, Kelly, I will see you on the other side, and
Yes.
Beth and Glen, please join us. I've had the pleasure of talking a lot with Beth and Glen. Friends, I have to apologize the other day when we were doing this planning meeting. I just did not want to let you off the phone. I just wanted to keep going and asking questions. Once one mystical door opened, another one was revealed. So we're just going to have to continue that conversation right here on the air. So first, Beth, could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Beth Box. I am a high school teacher and instructional coach in Okeechobee, Florida. And what else do you want to know? I've been gamifying for the last 3 or 4 years to great success, and I love sharing with people about it.
And you started off as in junior high social studies. Now you're AP psychology and also the instructional tech coach. You've switched roles, so you've worn a few different hats. Sounds like.
Yes. This year has been the change to high school, but I taught 7th grade for 7 years, and that's really where I started building my gamification chops.
Very cool. And Glen, you also wear a couple of different hats. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I am a high school Spanish teacher, but I am also the district technology integrationist, which keeps me busy, plenty busy throughout the district here. I've also been probably now a little bit over 2 years using different types of gamification and game-based learning inside my classroom. So, yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Right. Today, we're going to just define games a little bit because, you know what, if you know me, you know I don't really like buzzwords. I like to throw them out and deconstruct them, actually figure out what people are talking about. Then let's talk about, sometimes I like to start backwards. Let's talk about making the case. Glen and Beth, you do these things for a reason, so we'll talk about what things you're seeing happen in the classroom because of this. We're going to spend the bulk of our time in 3 and 4 here, actually looking at how our panelists have been building things in Schoology, what techniques they're using, not only in Schoology, but going on to number 4, extending out of Schoology, some other tools in their toolbox that maybe Schoology is linking out to. And we'll be wrapping up with some quick ideas on where you could start, some tips there, and then a little cherry on top, lessons learned. I'm sure we've all made some mistakes along the way as well. So Beth, Glen, let's first talk about defining games. When we were talking earlier, we kind of threw a bunch of buzzwords on the screen, and do they all mean the same thing? Do they mean different things? Let's start with Glen. What is your philosophy around gamification, and is there a definition you go with?
When people ask me if I gamify my classroom, I describe various different things. For me, gamification means you're layering game elements in your classroom, and those could be a wide variety of different things. Game-based learning, on the other hand, for me, I also incorporate that into my classroom, and that would be things where you're more seriously involved. You have a narrative, a storyline. Your students are participating in it, and they're either role-playing or delving themselves into the class in that manner too.
Yeah, very interesting. So you're taking the constructs of the class and the constructs of what a game is and marrying the two in various ways. And it sounds like it's, I think, maybe important to define, just pulling this apart a little bit, that idea that the classroom can be gamified, can feel like a game with the narratives and stories you're talking about, but also there may be incorporations of games in the classroom. Some of the tools you're using may be games in and of themselves.
Exactly. I would say you can use a combination of any of these things depending upon, again, your comfort level and how far you want to extend yourself. And I've extended myself pretty much to the deep end there. So I do use gamification elements, as Beth does too, and I do use actual games within my class, things like Minecraft and some other things that have been more education-based, also games.
Very cool. And Beth, how would you expand on what Glenn has said about the sort of elements of games and elements of classroom?
Really, he said everything that I think I would have said. He described it really well. To me, it was just kind of laying out the elements of game design and the elements of good instruction, and then seeing where those two worlds meet. And then taking as much of that as possible and kind of overlaying that into your class structure.
So let's bring up this. After our meeting, I continued researching, as I sometimes do, and found this lovely diagram, and I'll put the source here. And this is not from an educator. This is from a game designer. Really talking about what is a game and what isn't a game. I think that when we're defining games, that can be a question, especially for someone who is maybe not comfortable with the idea, or even maybe the phrase of game-based learning. It could maybe seem silly or contrite. I'm also thinking of all of our college faculty on the line today, where if you say the word gamification in a faculty meeting, you might get a chuckle from your colleagues because it might sound a little bit silly. But both of you have, in our planning, have talked a lot about the constructs, the elements. It sounds like there's a lot of theory involved of, well, what makes a game? And both of you have been make the case that, which this might be some people's reticence here, is that, no, you're not giving a student an iPad with a game on it. That happens to be educational. It's a bit more than that. It's not the game, it's the instruction and design of learning.
I think that's pretty accurate. You know, normally when people hear the word game at all, they think you're letting your kids goof off, you're just kind of automating the class in such a way that they play all day and you don't have to do anything. But like you said, it's much more based on theory and design, and that you begin to see you know, those things that are required to make something a game are really things that should be embedded in your instruction anyway. So you take all the bells and whistles away, all the, you know, the flowery, silly stuff, and you realize a good game is set up in such a way to teach you something. That's why we as human beings kind of crave that.
And of those rules of game design, well, they're rules in the first place. It's clearly not silly. The idea of consequences, outcomes, effort. Probably in education we would talk about engagement instead of effort. We might use a different word there. Valorization of outcomes, that students are invested in what happens. It's not just an A and then it goes in the garbage. And that there's, what's interesting is variable outcome, possibly, is the risk, is the mystery, things like that.
I would also add that I've been looking at that little inner circle and thinking about a question somebody posed on Twitter, and I've also heard Dr. Chris Haskell reference this and basically states that school in itself is a game. If you look at all those different things within it, it's just that many times it's a really bad game. It's really set up bad when we talk about engagement or really people buying into what you're selling as far as in class, many times all our students are sitting there and they're not buying into this game. They wouldn't purchase it. So that's, you're trying to gather the best elements of a game and then say, can't we use this within classrooms? Well, we do currently, but it's not that good, well set up. So we want to make sure we gather those best elements and then bring out those elements and then be able to put in our curriculum, our outcomes, whatever that we actually want to go ahead and teach and place it within that inner circle.
I like that you're pointing out that there is a difference between good games and bad games, that the game can exist but you don't necessarily want to play it. It's like that sort of legendary story now of I believe it was an Atari game of E.T. and all of the cassettes were eventually buried. The myth goes that they're all buried in the desert because this game was so bad because E.T. would just fall in a well and that was the whole game. You had to get out of this well. It was incredibly boring. We don't want our games to be forced upon people and that they're boring. The idea is that you bring yourself to it, right? So if you want this graphic, want to read more about some of the theories we've been talking about and get deeper into that, I've put the URL in chat here. So you both got into this for a reason, and you've both seen some results after getting into this. I think some people, when they think about gamification, it just might sound fun for the instructor. It's more fun for you. But if you're trying to get your principal or superintendent or your lead teacher involved, we need a bit more, right? So, Beth, why did you get into this, and do you have any anecdotes regarding outcomes you've seen change?
I feel like I've told this story 100 times, so if you guys have heard it before, forgive me.
I think 101.
A few years ago, when I was still teaching 7th grade, we just had a group of kids that they were so unmotivated and they just did not care. You could give them zeros, you could call home, and they just didn't care. So I knew I needed to do something, and I started doing some research online. I came across Jane McGonigal talking about serious games and how they can change the world, and that led me to Chris Aviles and everything, and I started finding out all this information about gamification, and I kind of shrugged and said, well, what have you got to lose? They're already, doing terribly. So I started implementing the elements of game design into my class. And what I began to see was more authentic engagement, more just genuine interest from my students. I saw a lot of my lowest achievers become my highest achievers because now they're motivated by that game structure. As far as test results go, I had many of my 7th graders who were scoring 1s and 2s on their reading exams, on their math exams, kids who have never passed a standardized exam in their life, who were making 3s and 4s, which, if you're not in Florida, that's passing, on my civics end of course exam at the end of the year. And then as I switched to high school, I saw the same thing. I kind of stepped out of gamification at the beginning of the year because I had been told, and I let myself be swayed, that maybe that was too silly at the high school level. And I saw the same thing happen with my kids. They disengaged, they didn't care, so I brought it all back. And now I'm seeing the same results with my high schoolers, that they just are authentically more interested and more focused on their work than they ever were before.
That sounds pretty tangible, right? Real results. And is that you started, I'm going to call it the silly fallacy. Oh, high school, maybe not games, gotta be serious now. But once they were reintroduced, totally different environment, different culture.
Yes, it went from being, and it's like I said the other night, it went from being, when is this due, how long does it need to be, to where can I find out more about this, or, can you help me with... Sorry.
I'm waiting for the BBC moment.
Interruption. Uh, sorry, that threw me off. Just
Yeah, the questions people ask, I think that's like a huge thing. And one thing we talked about planning this was, and it can, I think it can be a little bit of a trick and a distractor to say, but did test scores change? Because it's so, come on, we all know, if you're on this call, that that is just one measurement. Um, Here's a tip. When we get into gamification based off of that story, what if you kept a record of the questions students ask before introducing gamification and afterwards? And you could even do that in Schoology, in the comments area, in the updates area, wherever you collect questions. If students are asking them digitally, you could actually create a record of the quality and quantity of the questions students are asking in more of a traditional setting to those questions that they may ask in a gamified setting, and really watch the quality of those questions change. Because ultimately, right, a good student is not necessarily an answer giver, they're a question asker in the best scenario. Glenn, you had an experiment too, with some of this evidence of how things change, and I believe you did a 6 to 9 week experiment where students could either go the gamified route or not go the gamified route?
Yes, I ended up giving student choice, and I wanted only students that were really interested in basically. I set up two different things: regular assignments, as we had been using them for the first 3 quarters of school, and then I set up uh, basically a Minecraft EDU role-playing adventure. And the main rule was that we were all citizens of a new country that we were going to be creating together, and we were going to be doing all these different adventures, but the main rule was that we must always communicate in Spanish, whether it be in writing, on Schoology, and to each other, actually, while we were in our computer lab. Some people saw the workload within the the gamified, the game-based thing, and they were like, I don't want to do that. I just want to do the regular assignments. So I actually got 9 weeks worth of data, and in the end, as I had talked to Brad and Beth, I I saw several things. Number one, of course, I had more engagement. I had kids that were submitting and turning in all assignments, not only turning in their assignments, they were on time, which is a good thing. And then not only that, but the quality of the assignments would be extremely high level, really in-depth, expanding beyond what were the set outcomes. So I was like, okay, well, here's what we're working with. No, they wanted to expand beyond it because they wanted some true communication to take place. One of my students, there was like a Twitter, I won't call it a battle, but kind of was. And basically someone was calling whether or not Minecraft was a fad or, in education. And one of my students actually had an amazing response, not prompted by me. He said that what we did in Spanish class with Minecraft in this role-playing adventure was as close as you could come to actually being immersed in a Spanish-speaking country, which he had done the previous summer. He said it felt very similar. We went in there with the intent to always communicate in the second language. We had to do it, but it didn't feel forced. So it didn't feel like they came into it with the best expectations for themselves and for their classmates too, and they kind of kept themselves in check. In a normal teaching environment, students meet what you say. You set a certain bar here, and they meet that bar, and they're cool. They're like, that's all. I don't need to go beyond that point because you just set the bar right there. In this environment, it went well beyond that. My students were basically, as it says right here, authentically creating language. So they dictated what we were going to be learning. I set some parameters up and what we needed to do, but in order to truly communicate, they were dictating the path we were going to go in, whether it be about vocabulary or grammatical tenses or whatever it might be. It was just about communication. So it was huge and eye-opening for me, and as I sat back, I was like, okay, this was the perfect experiment to go and be running at the exact same time.
Hearing both of your stories, you know how I hate buzzwords, but some of them are coming to mind. let's deconstruct a few, shall we? A lot of what you're saying, you know, you hear it, a lot of educators or in PD talk about student voice and choice. Sounds like it's pretty inherent in gamified education.
That's kind of the way I look at it. That's the whole point of a game, is you determine your path. Ultimately, we're all...
You can't do it without those things.
Exactly. If you're dictating everything for your students and you're not allowing them to have their voice or to make their decisions about what their learning is going to look like, it's no longer really a game. Because the whole point of a game is we all have that same end goal that we're trying to get to, but the way we get there, it depends on our strengths. You know, we choose the path that best matches the skills that we have. And that's where you get that student buy-in, because now they know I don't have to match up to somebody else's standards. I can use my own.
Is game design and learning, or gameful learning, is it also inherently driven by concepts like student mastery and project-based learning?
Absolutely. Yes. Beth and I are on the same page on this, and basically project-based learning and mastery learning and game-based learning, or gamification, is basically, I think, the direction that teaching is headed. Is we want our students to master certain outcomes. Sometimes they will need different ways of showing that, of being able to reach that exact same point. They will need a variety of different ways to be able to do the activities, to be able to get themselves enough practice to be able to get to whatever that outcome may be. But in the end, they, at their own usually pace, as what I remember Beth was talking about, will get to those outcomes that they need to get to. And I think my students, not only are they engaged more, as it says up on the screen there, they actually know that they're learning. They're like, at first they think, okay, this is weird that we're doing these games or Minecraft, whatever it might be, or that you have these leaderboards. But in the end, they come to you and let you know, hey, I actually learned a lot of stuff. Here, and they could demonstrate. Here's all the different things that I've actually picked up just in this this year, in this unit, or whatever it might be.
Fascinating. Well, let's roll up our sleeves a little bit. So we have, getting into building these things in Schoology. I think our audience is now nice and antsy to get into it. We have the elements, some elements of instruction, which we've talked about, the sort of assignments or projects, or all those knowledge proofs, you might call them. And then those game elements. We've mentioned a few elements here, leaderboards, journeys, missions, things like that. Let's break that down a little bit. Based on everything you all told me, I've put together, and you can find a lot of resources on this on the web. You just Google away, game elements. Here are 8 different elements, and some I've lumped together. The idea of story and conflict, mystery, of unknown outcomes, that there's challenge, that there's often teamwork to meet those challenges, the things you can't necessarily do on your own in certain games, that there's a risk. When you roll the dice, you don't know what's going to happen necessarily. And then you have resources, the magic shield or sword you might wield, etc. Or, in the classroom setting, maybe the book or the resource that you have. That there's progress, that you control that progress, and that there is some kind of scoring, a leaderboard, some sort of idea that you are really invested in how you are doing, and even better, if you know how you're doing compared to others. And then that you have the opportunity to master something. I was stuck on this one level of 2 dots for 3 weeks. I kid you not, 3 weeks. I deleted the game off my phone twice and then put it back on because it frustrated me so much that I couldn't pass this level. Kept coming back for it. So that opportunity for mastery. Glen and Beth, what if we overlaid some elements of instruction here, and we'll do this quickly here. The idea that story, conflict, and the resources and strategies that you have to meet that conflict sounds a little bit like scope and sequence of the instructional content that you might be using. Let's take that a little further. The mystery, the unknown outcomes, the progress. Well, that's a lot of built into maybe our course design, how we're laying things out, what we're calling things in Schoology. The idea of teamwork, action, risk, ongoing assessments. How are our students being assessed? What are the projects? What's the homework? What nature of those is there? And then the scoring, the leaderboards, the opportunity for mastery. Well, is that all maybe packaged in our evaluation and the feedback students are receiving as they are going on this journey? This is not necessarily the only way to map this, but for those of you who are just the 50% of you who have not tried things, I think being able to possibly marry those pieces of instruction with those pieces of what we enjoy in games together is sometimes our first step, is just how do things translate over. So let's talk to Beth for a little bit here, and Glenn, you and I and Kelly will be the voice of everyone on the call today. We'll keep pummeling Beth with questions. But this is a screenshot of your course, of one of your course. Talk to me a little bit about what we're looking at here.
Well, these are the teams that I have my students divided into, or guilds, as it says on their leaderboard. Basically what I did, I toyed around with the fact for a long time of did I want them sitting in their teams or did I want the teams broken up across the room. And ultimately what I decided is I wanted the teams broken up, so at each table in my room I have one member of each team, and there's one more team that just didn't make it in the screenshot. But what that then allows me to do is each team is working on something different. So now everybody at that table is working on something different, and they can kind of collaborate and share. If somebody that they're sitting next to hits something that maybe they've already covered, they can work together on that. And then whenever I have team challenges or things that I want them to work on with their teammates, that gives me a chance to bust up the class and kind of move them around, because that's just something I've always been a big believer in, is you need to get your kids moving, you need to have them working with as many different people as possible at any given time. And this was just a way for me to do that. So they compete as teams. At the end of the week, whichever team has the most XP, they get to, we have a class dragon, and so the class dragon wears their medallion for the next week, and then they get some candy. That's just a little bit easier for me to manage. I don't like tangible rewards, but that's a small one that I'm able to give. And it's a way for them to manage one another, because if they see a member of their guild slacking, I actually had one girl come up to me the other day and she was like, so-and-so, they're really not getting caught up on their work. I know they're working late every night, so we kind of told her she has to come over to our house this weekend, and we're going to get her caught up. She's got to start getting more done. And I was like, well, thank you. Now you're doing my job for me, because I'm not going to have to stay on her anymore. You guys are going to do it.
That's some serious incentive. that someone be going that depth. It's, that basically, it's like one of those silly reality shows where, Survivor, one of those things. It's like, well, they got to carry the one person over the log. That's it.
Exactly.
If they don't get over, we're done. And that really works. Let's talk about design. That I geek out over every little decision we make here. Your top-level folders are teams, and I think that's, from a design perspective, that's an interesting choice, an interesting place to start, is that your top-level folders are not units, they're teams.
And I might change that next year. This was something I toyed around this year because what that allows me to do is I know those members of that team are working on this stuff in this time frame, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
because everybody's kind of working in different areas. That just helps me orient as the teacher where that student should be. So if I know that that student is a neuropsychologist, I know they're going to be working on one of these 3 or 4 things that's currently in their folder.
And a question from the gallery: does everyone see each other's folders? It's at this point in Schoology, we can't necessarily individually assign a folder. Big feature request, can't wait till that happens. But do you have a strategy around that? Or does it matter?
It really, I haven't seen anywhere where it matters because they're not so concerned with what anybody else is doing. They're worried about themselves and how far they're getting. So I haven't seen anybody even trying to look in somebody else's folder because that wouldn't get them anywhere. It wouldn't give them any kind of an edge.
That seems like a good takeaway when people think about gamification, some things we talked about. It could sound like a lot of work, but what I'm hearing is don't over-engineer your course.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Have as much planned out as possible, but understand there's going to be some fluidity throughout the year as you see things that maybe worked last year and they're not working this year. You have your core content planned out, but you can adjust as you see fit. And, I've definitely made adjustments just this year, things that worked for my 7th graders that don't work at all for my high schoolers.
And here's another folder structure. This is from your civics class. And this is a subfolder. You can see up here that we're in Quest 1 within that. So I imagine, Glenn, you have something similar when we're looking at some of your screenshots. But for someone not familiar, is every unit a quest? Is it a mission? Do those words matter? Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
For my 7th graders, every unit was a quest, and then every lesson, or in my case, standard or benchmark, was a mission. And so your quest was kind of this set of standards that I felt all worked together well to form a unit. And then I would lay out my unit plan. This is all just basic lesson designing. It's no different from what you would typically do. Now we have dogs running around, so it's an exciting day here. And then what I would do is I would break it down into each individual standard so I could unpack that standard and really get to the meat of what the kids needed to know. And then that became every single mission.
So with the social studies standard, somehow I missed that this name was in the Common Core, or of course, those of you, if anyone's scratching your head, of course these are not the names, but it's going along with this should not necessarily be anything different than what you're already doing. It's a common best practice anyway when you're taking your standards to rename them and to make them content specific. Is that simply what we're doing here, but everything is just a little bit more fun?
That's basically what's happening. I mean, you can see that underneath each one I have the actual benchmark laid out, and that's more for my administration than for the kids. I mean, they would look over that, but a lot of times that language is a little bit over their head. So the titles just basically tied up what the general idea of that benchmark was. What are we trying to get at with this? And it helped them communicate with me where they were at. They didn't necessarily want to say, I'm working on SS7C210, but they would come to me and say, I'm in, what was that one called? Oh, What's in the Headlines. I'm in What's in the Headlines, and I need help with this. And so it was a way for us to communicate about where they were in the game.
And it sounds like this is also helping connect your students over here also with your administrators over here, that you've covered all of your bases right now.
Right.
And Beth, we talked about this before, but this is self-paced mastery, correct?
Yeah. Yes, and I personally, I feel like that's crucial. I've had a lot of teachers talk to me and say that I can't do that. I've got to have deadlines, and if that's who you are and that's how you operate, that's fine. But for me, it's more important just because it's more truly reflective of a game to be self-paced. Because if you've ever played any kind of game before, like what Brad said, he was stuck on that level for 3 weeks. He got it eventually. I'm assuming you got it eventually and you made it past.
It was a glorious day.
But if I would have told you, you must have this done by next Monday, you probably would have given up because you would have been like, I'm not going to make it. I'm doing this all the time. I'm not making any progress. I'm not going to make it by Monday, so I quit. And sometimes I think that's where some of our lower level learners are, that if it's not self-paced and they're under this deadline and it's too hard for them to get it in that amount of time, they just quit on us and then they don't do anything. And so I find that by removing those deadlines and focusing more on mastery and being self-paced, those kids are now willing to dig in because they know you are more worried about me understanding this than about me meeting an arbitrary deadline that doesn't match my learning style.
Totally. And this, I believe, is this part of your civics class that we're looking at?
Yes, this is where it's loaded in the public resources.
So those of you in chat who are saying, I want to see inside the folders and check out everything, guess what? You can. Beth has open sourced this one. And this is actually inside of that quest. So if you drilled all the way in, you would see a mission briefing, an assignment called reconnaissance, challenges. So, and it's interesting that you're also surfacing, making really visible how many points everything is worth.
Mm-hmm.
And any administrator looking at this immediately also sees the rigor. So if there's any sort of political diciness as being a trailblazer here, well, you have your bases covered.
And that's really why I did all of that. As we cracked down with our new evaluation system and everything, I had to prove that I was doing all of these things because at the surface level, it didn't look like I was doing any of it, and I had to show them I'm doing the same thing a traditional teacher would do. It's just set up a little bit differently.
Yeah. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about leaderboards when we look at both, but the idea for anyone not doing this, it's interesting that you, Beth, I believe, only use Google Sheets for scoring, and Glen, because you have some grade pass back or you're using some integrations, you use the Schoology gradebook, but also complement it with a leaderboard.
That's correct. Beth, I really like your levels here. I'm always trying to come up with different names for your levels. This is fantastic for AP Psych, all your different masters there.
Fantastic. Yeah, it helps. It serves dual purpose. Number one, it identifies the levels. Number two, it kind of reinforces those names. So when they get on the exam, oh, Adler, I've seen that name so many times.
Nice. And you're also using badges. Do you apply them once people pass a certain threshold, or do they also earn badges for things that are not XP?
Like I said earlier, my high school class, we kind of got off to a late start because I was trying not to be silly, so I don't have as many badges for my high schoolers yet. I fully intend to go, crazy with the badges next year, because for my 7th graders, there were badges based on mastery. So when you've mastered a quest or when you've mastered a standard, there were badges based on just amount of XP. Hey, you've reached a huge milestone. I had badges for attendance to try and encourage a little bit more attendance. So for perfect attendance or missing fewer than 2 days. I had badges for seemingly silly things, like if a kid made a really good Harry Potter reference, I would give them a crazy ton of XP for that, and then they'd get a badge. So I intend to do that with my high schoolers as well. We're just a little bit more streamlined this year. But it's just different ways to recognize what they're doing in class. And
The idea that you can also give that feedback or give a score, but students can then also use that score for other things, like things in non-tangibles in your item shop. If you download this presentation, it's in the handout section. Everyone on the call, you should be able to download a PDF of this if you want to take it, look at it in more detail. And not just an item shop, but a gift shop too. So the idea, right? And I think what's really interesting about gamification is that the interaction doesn't end with the grade and the marked up paper. That then that grade is this thing you can transfer in for other things. That it's that there's an economy ecosystem about everything you are earning. Like we talk about earning an A, but well, how do you use that A that you've earned in a traditional classroom setting? In XP point, you actually can use the thing you earned. So let's jump off from there and talk about not just building things in Schoology, but extending from Schoology. Feel free to take a screenshot of this, everybody, or check it out in the handout. These are a lot of go-to tools out there that are great to embed inside of Schoology or to reach out and to extend what you can do. Glen, you do a lot with this. Let's take a look at your course here. And one thing I find striking, and we haven't talked enough about this, is just design. That design matters in your course. You're not just having folders with nothing in them, but you see that folder way up here. But your course is just dominated by nice, big, chunky images.
Yeah, I decided this year that I'm moving as far away from text as I possibly can do, being that students, they'll read some text, as far as for directions, but even better is for me to embed, like if you looked inside of this folder, you would find some directions because it was the first one we were working on. But overall, the other missions, this is mission 1.1, BCO 1.1, you can see there's some words in English because it's kind of setting up kind of the whole scenario, what's happening here. And basically, my students, this is a new thing that I tried out. It's about a quarter long also, and it's an alternative assignment. Basically, you can either do the traditional route or you can do this. Just like Beth, I got all my standards and my outcomes of whatever I wanted to do, and I rolled it up into basically a storyline. You have this alien invasion, and it's just you and your classmates that decide that are basically the survivors. You have a resistance leader, that's me, and they watch these videos, which the videos are like really creepy, edited videos, which are they kind of have what's the group that sends out the messages on YouTube? I can't even think of it right now. But anyway, they have these creepy messages on there that give them their missions, and they're all in Spanish. The missions are all in Spanish. They have to listen to what's being told to them and then complete certain things by that end of that week. And we set it up week by week, though each week I probably have 4 or 5 different missions depending upon the how much time I think they're going to need to be able to take on them. I really leave it open. I give a deadline as far as a week just so that they know the next week there's going to be some cool new things that are going to be coming up, and who knows what the adventure is going to take place at. But really what's happening is the students are watching a video inside of Schoology. They are playing a game inside of Minecraft. They're with their classmates, and they're communicating in the Spanish language trying to accomplish X missions, whatever it is. But they can only communicate, again, in the second language. Since it's part of this resistance movement, we send out these Twitter messages to our captors trying to tell them that we're not going to, kind of 1984 style stuff where we're not going to, stand back and just let you rule over us. And so we have this kind of whole, what do they call it? Augmented reality game, basically an alternative reality game kind of going on in the background also. And there's certain kids who don't want to ever have anything to do with this, so I don't want to force them into this. So I usually have 50-50, 60-40 splits between people that want to go ahead and do it and don't. And what Beth just finished saying, I don't want to have a kid forced to do any of this, because if it's not their cup of tea, they're not going to. If you set a game in front of somebody and they're like, I don't really like playing those kind of games, then they're not going to invest themselves into it. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the thing that I talked about from last year that I used in my Spanish 2 class, which basically was we set up a world, and we were the new adventurers in this world, and the only rule was we could only speak Spanish to each other. You can see the directions are set up there in Spanish, and there's a video that goes along with each one of the missions, basically. The videos are all in Spanish, and they can see kind of what do they need to actually go ahead and do within the world. Within Minecraft, I opened up pieces of a little piece of the world at a time. So they were contained within a certain space, and then I opened up a new area. So each week they were like, what's going to happen this week? You know, and then they saw the video, they got to read the thing, then they started communicating with each other. And they worked on this obviously during class. We have a study hall hour here at our school district, and a lot of teachers got really mad at me because kids were heavily doing this before school, after school, because the server was basically open at all times, and they were super heavily invested in this, and they came up with things that I only thought of certain things, and then they put it to new levels. So they expanded it to new levels. It actually gave me a lot of different ideas to use this year. So the students, really student-driven. You give them some certain things, like here it talks about they appear in now they are able to go to a certain part of the world, and it's Little London, basically, and so they're going to talk with Shakespeare and some different Shakespearean characters, and Shakespeare is a little NPC character inside the world, and they communicate with him in Spanish and get some different clues, and Juliet lost Romeo, and so you have to go find him and talk with her and have these conversations with these NPCs. And then they also do some building within the game itself too, bringing it back to historical type stuff like the Globe Theater and stuff like that. You can see that as far as in that mission. And I set up deadlines only because I want kids to know, okay, here's what we're going to do this week. Next week we're going to roll on to other things. If kids didn't end up completing this, they understand that they have the ability to be able to still, obtain those things and be able to do that.
It's more like you set a sort of expected pace so that
Yes.
they don't think that this is a two-week thing.
Yes.
It's almost like let's talk more about two dots. So you get kicked out of the game after 20 minutes. It's like their due date can simply be an enjoyable constraint of the game, but not necessarily something that prevents you from mastering it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Beth, I want to bring something to you and to both of you. Is something Glen said about that the students brought a lot to the game, and they even brought more to the game than expected, which in essence made opportunity to alter the game, that the rules could change, or what was possible could change, and that it creates a feedback loop to the teacher. It sounds like your game got better as students interacted with it. Am I getting that right? And Beth, do you have a similar experience there?
Your kids will tell you very quickly what works and what doesn't. And even if they don't mean to, the things that they don't engage with, or the things that you introduce that kind of fall flat, that's your feedback right there. If it's not driving the instruction, if it's not encouraging more engagement, then this is something I either need to retool or just get rid of. This isn't something that's working for them. So your kids will make it very clear right out of the gate what is going to work and what's not going to work. And then it's up to you as a teacher. And that, again, that's just good instruction, no matter how your class is set up, to be able to say, this isn't so precious to me that I'm not willing to give something up for the kids. You're trying to design this for them. So if there's some element that you design that doesn't work for them, you have to be willing to hack that off and try something different.
And do you think that there would be, here are a bunch of terrific examples from a media album, from some of that student engagement, and as students are giving you that feedback, engaging with the content in any way you make, I just have a feeling that with traditional content, students might have a lot of feedback to give, but that would be silent. You wouldn't really hear it. There may not be the stakes at play that would make a student give you the feedback, or because they simply get a grade, a traditional grade, that it's, well, we're done with that. There are not enough stakes to give the feedback.
Right. That's definitely what I've found in the more traditional learning. There's this sense of completion. Like you said, we're done with that. We don't need to worry about that anymore. When I started moving to more gamification, there's this idea that, yes, I may have finished that 3 or 4 weeks ago, but something from that is going to come up again, or something that I gained from that I'm going to be able to use in the future. Your kids, no matter how old they are, if you're invested in a system where you give them a grade and then you move on to something else, they'll go with that, and you're not going to get that real learning, because all they want is that number on the paper. And for some of them, they want a high number. For some of them, they don't care if it's a low number. But once they get that number, you have shut the door on that learning, and you've told them, we're done with that. Don't even think about it anymore. We don't intentionally tell them that, but in their brain, that's what they hear.
And you teach AP Psychology, so I trust you.
Yes, I know things.
We've had a lot of great questions about XP, about points. Let me just give you a few, and maybe you can dive into this, Glen. Some questions were, well, how are you deciding the weight of XP for different items, different missions, and different quests, etc.? How are those things tracked, and what's the relationship with taking this and actually, at the end of the day, putting a grade in the grade book? Can you talk to me a little bit about this? And I think you got your leaderboard from one of our favorite people to talk about.
Yes, Chris Avilas, this is actually his leaderboard, and many of the stuff in the item store has just been modified that he created. And basically, in my class, it's different with Beth's, but I'll let Beth talk about that too. You can see up here on this leaderboard, the top of this leaderboard, there's a couple different things. There's XP, which in my class, XP is really their points, like what points they've actually earned in class. Now you can see there's a lot of points already there. There's usually a lot of points. Spendable AP, or the achievement points, are things that they earn because they did something as far as in class. Completed a level, as Beth had been describing, or doing specific missions, whatever it might be, and completed them at the level that they needed to complete it at. Then they received an achievement, which would have been the badges inside of Schoology, and you then received some sort of achievement points. The things that they use in my class to spend money on or spend points on is achievement points. I think Beth has it set up where she has experience points, as I saw in her thing, and she lets them spend those things. Is that correct, Beth?
In my 7th grade class, I had it set up very much like you do. Right now, I can honestly say I don't really have a store. I started out with one, and the kids, for my high schoolers, the items that I have in the store just didn't pique their interest as much, so that's going to be something I have to restructure over the summer. So again, like I said, they'll give you feedback. I just stopped tracking AP this year because it wasn't being effective the way that I was doing it, and so now we just stick with XP, and they're more about beating each other on that board. Next year I'm going to retool my item shop and try and get things that they would be more interested in purchasing with their AP. because I like the AP system. I love rewarding that for different achievements. It worked really well with my 7th graders. I just have to learn how to speak the language of juniors and seniors.
It is different, though, big time. And I communicate all the time with the different class coming in, and I tell them about the item store, and I start we talk out some of the things, and we actually vote up and vote down different things, and it depends on. And then I also give them an opportunity to give me things that belong in the item store. And there's some that are ridiculous, but I do get some actually really positive idea. I'm like, okay, we can do that. We can do that. I just saw some of the items in the way that you've created your store, and I'm definitely going to be considering some of those things. I see how you're structuring it too. It's really good to see how other people are doing it also. Mine is anonymous, as you can see with the learner tags, but kids can identify themselves if they wanted to, and some of them do. As we had the conversation the other night, they do change their name to their real names to show everybody that's where they're actually at as far as on the leaderboard itself.
Right. And for both of you, I believe both of you use Google Sheets that then allows you to embed the leaderboard right in Schoology, so they're not going to necessarily a separate application to see that.
Yep, exactly right.
Very cool. Let me ask some questions in here as we get to the end of our session. A lot of people are asking, where do I start? If I wanted to go out of this, if I just wanted to do a couple of things. While both of you think about that, let me ask some other questions that have come up. The use of badges, of course, in Schoology, badges are not automated. Does that work out okay for you? Or of course, we would all like badges to be automated at some point in the future. Are you using any other automatic mechanisms? I'm guessing possibly student completion rules. Along that lines, are you using test quizzes or using the automation in that in a quiz as part of any of your feedback to create more instantaneous interactions?
Let me rephrase. The quizzes and tests, that's one of the easiest ways to automate because, like we talked about the other night, I expect 100% completion. You need to work until you get to 100%. So for a lot of assignments, that requires me to go in with my rubric and review and see what they did. For a test or a quiz, that's the easiest thing in the world. When you've set your completion rules, they must get 100% on this before they can move on. That's really easy for me to set. And then I can adjust, when they retake their test or quiz, what is it going to look like? Are they going to get the same thing? Do they take a different version? I have the option to adjust all of that. And then once they hit that 100%, they're moving on. So that's feedback that's given for me. But automated badging would be great.
Yes.
Yes, it's Google of future ideas.
That and individually assigning folders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great too.
So for those of you who haven't seen this, in your student completion rules in a test quiz, one of the really nice things about a test quiz is the score at least option. So you can require perfection before someone can move on. And then the trick here is that in the test itself, allowing unlimited attempts.
And also, I got the idea from Chris Avilas, the test banks, and Beth, I bet you use those too. So creating a test bank so that a student takes it, and then they're like, okay, I didn't really get it. Give an opportunity to go ahead, review the materials, ask questions, those kinds of things, and then come back. The test has different questions, sorted and as far as in the thing.
Right.
And,
so importing from question banks and using random questions.
Yes.
So you have a bank big enough so that the test is a little bit different every time.
And just kind of from a philosophical standpoint, that is where a lot of teachers hang up when I talk to them about this. The option to retake tests, that's where I lose them, and they throw their hands up and they're like, oh my gosh, no. That is the worst possible thing you can ever do. if you're finding yourself thinking that, think about in the real world. Usually there's a monetary issue when you have to go to retake a test, but every professional test you will ever have to take in your life, you can take unlimited times. Yes, you may have to pay for it every time, and you can include that with your XP or AP if you want some kind of system like that. But don't get so hung up on only allowing a kid to take a test one time, because that doesn't really reflect the real world. It doesn't reflect the gamified world, but it doesn't reflect the real world either. So if that's something that scares you about gamification, don't let it. I mean, they can retake it. It'll be okay.
I would also include that I can use this, the test automation of the test for formative assessments, and so then I know, yeah, they have a good idea, especially on this, they've passed this, but now when are you going to prove something to me by, whatever it might be that they're going to be doing, and give us some options as far as ways to be able to prove, certain outcome. It can be, for me, it could be speaking, reading, writing, whatever, presenting something, whatever it might be, give them a wide variety of options. But for formative assessment, I mean, that's fantastic. You can keep redoing it. You can keep it, and the test itself is learning. It's evolved. It's learning. You're like, okay, these are some questions I didn't even know, how to answer these ones. I need to go back and review or ask questions about what's going on here.
And so in that design approach, I think it's important to note that the test is coming early on as a formative activity that is unlocking an additional door, and the summative activity is going to be more project-based and more of that self-directed. Okay, now prove it.
Yes.
Now prove that you've learned something. So here you can take these with you, some bullets of where to get started. We are just a little past 11 o'clock, so we'll start wrapping up here and taking any final questions. The idea of having stories, that sort of prove it policy of you can submit any way you like, but prove your learning. Using total points and things like that certainly changes the dynamic, because you're gathering points instead of feeling like you're starting at 100 and can only work backwards. The idea of allowing students to work at their own pace, which means being okay with students working far ahead, possibly. So a lot of tips to continue with here. Of course, what we started off with, and Beth, you brought this up, is play good games. And while you're just playing games that you enjoy, pay attention to what you're enjoying. Can that be modeled in a course? We got some questions of, well, how would this work with core elementary subjects? Well, pay attention to the things that you like. And then, as you all did, you started with your learning objectives and the core things you need to cover. Work backwards from there. Not dissimilar to how we design courses from the get-go. You can take these with you. These are just a really nice list of blogs and playlists and books about gamification. And for our final thoughts, Glen, Beth, what are our lessons learned? Do you have any good takeaways here? I'll leave this up on the screen.
I would say
any famous early stumbles.
I would say, number one, it's okay to start with a project. Like you put on the previous page, start with one little thing and kind of just play around with the idea, get your students' feedback. It doesn't have to involve an actual video game. Some people are like, well, Minecraft, and I can't afford it, and whatever it might be. Doesn't have to. All it has to do is involve his creative mindset. And think of things, talk to your students about things that they're interested in, like Beth was just talking about the Hogwarts kind of thing, with 7th and 8th graders. That might have been a high interest topic for them, where my 11th and 12th graders are interested in what do they do, what do they watch, what do they do, and then I can hook them with those elements and be able to put it into class, and then at least I know a good starting point. But yeah, don't be afraid to start super small. And if it fails, which a lot of my stuff has failed, I just want to tell everybody, a lot of my little lessons and whatever it might be, kids care, they're like, yeah, that was it. And it's totally fine. you're starting, again, if you always start off with the end outcome and you get there, if it's messy along the way, you can scrap kind of those things, but then you can kind of revisit stuff too. And then, of course, like I just finished looking at Beth's thing, I'm going to download this presentation too, and I'm going to take some of her ideas, take some of our ideas. I took a bunch of stuff from Chris Avidas and a bunch of Minecraft wizards out there. I just took their things and then modified it to fit my actual classroom, and that's where I'm at right now.
Very cool. And Beth?
Same thing Glenn said. Just don't be afraid. Learn from the people that came before you. We've shared some fantastic people who have kind of pioneered this field, and they've done a lot of the legwork for us. And they can start. If you go to Chris Avilas' website, Teched Up Teacher, he has outlined so many things already that are going to get you off to a good start, where you won't make the same mistakes that some people made in the very beginning. The biggest thing that I learned is you've got to stay on top of the grading. One of the things that makes a game so good is that immediate feedback. You cannot just sit there and say, I'll grade everything this weekend. Just as hard as the students are working, you've got to be looking at what they turn in. So my class is a constant back and forth of talking to students, and then I'm walking around with my computer, and as soon as something gets turned in, I sit down with them and I look at it and I let them know if it's good or not. And it's exhausting, but that's how you get that buy-in, because you're staying with them in that moment. So don't let yourself fall behind, or else it'll begin to fall apart at that point, because they're not getting the feedback. They've moved 5 assignments on, and now you're kicking them all the way back to one that they finished a while back. You've got to stay with them in that moment. It's worth it. If that sounds daunting.
That's exactly what one of our guests today asked was, in a real computer game, there's always just instantaneous feedback. And that could be one of the things that poses a challenge. I suppose going through completion rules can give you some immediate feedback when you get to a new page, but that idea of you being available to give that immediate feedback is key too. Do you structure your classroom instruction as our sort of final wrap-up point? Is that one key of unified classroom management?
For me, it is. For me, what my classroom looks like is everybody is doing their own thing, and then I'm just constantly moving around talking to whoever needs me. If I have a student that's plowing through it fine, they're mastering every objective without my help, that's good. They can talk to me when they want to talk to me. But what I need to be doing is be very mindful of students who are struggling, or students who are falling short of what I expect of them. And I'm not a real video game. I can't just automatically pop up that bubble that says, oh, you need to look over here and try this. So I have to be on the ball to be able to say, oh, I see where you just turned this in, but I see where you're having some trouble understanding some of these concepts. So let's talk about that. So I'm kind of my own in-game tutorial, and I have to be always available for that. And I do my best to be available via messaging and everything too. So if they're turning in something at night and I haven't, gone to sleep yet in my old lady hours, then I try and message them back and say, oh, I see what you're doing. This is really good. Or I need you to re-look at this. And that, that just, like I said, it's daunting, but it is so worth it when you see the outcome.
And more fun for you too, even if it's more work.
Yes.
Which is sort of a theory of motivation and being in flow and enjoying what one does to begin with. Well, I'd like to wrap up there. It seems like a good spot. If you did not catch our panelists' names in the beginning, I just want to thank Beth Box and Glen Irvin for joining us today in this really juicy conversation. This session has been recorded. We hope to have it up on YouTube and in our Help Center Tuesday of next week. So look for it then. And if you know someone else who wants to learn this stuff, we'll be doing this session again at 4 o'clock Eastern Time today again. Thank you all so much. And Kelly, thank you for monitoring the chat. You've been a busy bee there. We'll catch you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.